Elara was 13 years old on the day she was cast out. Her only crimes were seeing what others would not and speaking what others would not hear. She stood before the town council in the austere meeting hall, a small figure dwarfed by the heavy oak table and the stern faces of the men who decided her fate. Mayor Theron presided, his face a mask of civic impatience. To his right sat Gideon Croft, the wealthiest man in the settlement, his hands calloused from counting coin, not from labour. To his left was Master Valerius, the town scholar, a man whose world was contained entirely in the brittle pages of old books and maps.
"The girl claims bandits are scouting the valley," Mayor Theron announced, his voice filling the room. He did not look at Elara. He addressed the assembled townsfolk as if she were an object, a piece of troublesome furniture to be disposed of. "She speaks of signs," he continued, a thin smile touching his lips. "Broken twigs, the silence of jays,
Patterns in the dust." A low murmur of amusement rippled through the crowd. Elara stood straight, her hands clasped behind her back. She did not fidget. Her father, a scout before he was a farmer, had taught her to be still, to observe. He had taught her everything she knew in the short years they'd had. His lessons were her only inheritance, more valuable than the small, fallow plot of land he had left her. "My father taught me the signs," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the murmuring. "A large group, disciplined, not common raiders. They move along the high ridges, avoiding the game trails. They leave markers, carved into the bark of the oldest oaks. They are watching us."
Gideon Croft leaned forward, his bulk straining the buttons of his waistcoat. "And what would a girl know of such things? My new trading post has walls of stone, 2 feet thick. We have a militia. This town, this valley, is secure."
Her fanciful stories do nothing but stir unrest and frighten the children. "The maps show no such threat," Master Valerius added, his voice dry as dust. He tapped a rolled parchment on the table. "The official surveys from the capital confirm this region has been pacified for 2 generations. There are no recorded bandit enclaves within 100 leagues. It is a statistical and historical impossibility." They spoke of maps and walls. Elara spoke of the living world. They saw what they had built and what they had written. She saw what the forest was telling her. "The world is not a map," Elara said quietly. "And walls only matter if the threat comes from where you expect."
Mayor Theron slammed his gavel. The sound cracked through the hall. "Enough of this nonsense. This is not a debate, it is a judgment. Elara, orphan of this town, for the crime of willfully spreading fear and falsehoods. You are exiled. You will leave the town precincts by sunrise tomorrow."
"You may take your father's tools, his books, and the pony. Nothing more. Your land is forfeit to the town commons." There was no appeal. There was only the cold finality of the judgment. The townspeople watched her pack the next morning. They did not offer help. They did not offer comfort. They watched with a mixture of pity and contempt. She was the liar, the fool, the girl who saw shadows where there was only sunlight. She loaded the pony, a sturdy little beast named Jasper, with her meagre possessions. A spade, a pickaxe, 2 buckets, a saw, and her father's journal, its leather cover worn smooth by his hands. She did not look back at the town as she walked away. She looked forward, toward the rolling hills and the line of dark trees. She was an outcast, but she was not lost. She had her father's knowledge. She had a plan. She found her spot a mile from the town's edge, on a worthless piece of land no one had ever bothered to claim. It was a steep, south-facing hillside, thick with scrub and granite outcroppings. To the townsfolk, It was an ugly, useless place. To Elara, it was perfect. It offered drainage, camouflage, and the thermal mass of the earth itself. She began to dig. The work was brutal. The sun beat down on her small frame. The soil was rocky and dense. For the first week, she did little more than clear the brush and scrape away the topsoil, marking the dimensions of her project. It was not a simple hole. It was an excavation. The town did not forget her. Children, emboldened by their parents' scorn, would sometimes venture out to watch her. They would sit on the ridge above, whispering and giggling. "What is she doing?" one would ask. "Digging her own grave," another would answer, and they would all laugh. Soon, her project had a name: Elara's Folly. The name spread through the town like a contagion. It became a joke, a local piece of folklore in the making. Gideon Croft made a habit of riding his fine horse out to the site on his way to oversee the final touches on his stone trading post. He would rein in at a safe distance so as not to soil his boots, and look down at her. "Still digging your dirt hole, girl?" he would call out, his voice dripping with condescension. "My walls are topped with iron spikes. My gates are reinforced with steel. That is how civilized men achieve security, not by imitating badgers." Elara never answered him. She just kept working, the rhythmic scrape of her shovel a steady reply. Her silence infuriated him more than any retort could have. The mockery solidified into the town's lexicon. To embark on a foolish, pointless task became known as digging an Elara. A wife might scold her husband, "Stop tinkering with that broken pump, you're just digging an Elara." The phrase was a constant, casual reminder of the girl's madness and the town's collective wisdom. Master Valerius, in his role as public educator, penned a notice and had it nailed to the central post in the town square. It was a treatise on the virtues of progress and the foolishness of primitive superstition. It spoke of engineering, of civic planning, of the peaceful state of the territory, citing official proclamations. It never mentioned Elara by name, but everyone knew who the object of his intellectual scorn was. He was dismissing her unscientific methods, her reliance on what he called peasant folklore. Elara saw the notice on one of her rare, silent trips to the creek for water. She read the elegant script, the confident pronouncements. Then she looked at the woods beyond the town, and she knew the scholar was a fool. His books could not feel the change in the wind. His maps did not show the paths of desperate men. She returned to her hillside and her work. The town had its paper assurances. She would have earth and stone. Summer bled into autumn. The days grew shorter, the air sharper. Elara's labor did not cease. It became a part of the landscape, as natural as the turning of the leaves. Her hands, once a child's, were now hard and calloused. Her arms and back were lean with muscle. The sun had darkened her skin. She moved with an economy of motion born of endless, repetitive toil. Jasper the pony was her silent partner. He hauled away the endless buckets of dirt and rock, his patient strength a constant presence. He dragged timbers she cut from the deep woods, his hooves sure on the steep inclines. She spoke to him in low, soft tones, sharing the solitude, her words absorbed by his quiet loyalty. He was her confidant, her beast of burden, her only family. She was not just digging, she was engineering. Her father's journal was her guide, its pages filled with his precise diagrams and calculations. "The earth is your shield," he had written, "but it is also a weight and a source of water. You must respect all its properties." She dug deep into the hillside, creating a long, sloping entrance tunnel. She shored up the walls with thick timbers, angled precisely as the journal instructed, to bear the immense load of the earth above. She learned the language of geology, reading the strata of clay and rock, knowing where to dig and where to reinforce. She carved out a main chamber, 30 feet long and 20 feet wide, its ceiling a carefully constructed arch of interlocking stones and wood. It was a feat of intuitive physics, a lesson in load distribution that Master Valerius, with all his books, could never have conceived. From this main chamber, she dug smaller alcoves for storage. She dug a well, sinking it deep into the earth until she hit a clean, cold seam of water that seeped up through the gravel. It was a back-breaking task, hauling up bucket after bucket of wet clay, but the reward was a secure, hidden source of life.
Perhaps the most ingenious part of her design was the ventilation system. Her father's journal described how to create a thermal siphon. She dug 2 shafts, one on the low end of the cellar and one at the highest point. The entrance was a carefully disguised hollow log, packed with moss and ferns. The exhaust flue was a taller, seemingly dead tree trunk, its core hollowed out. The natural temperature difference would draw fresh air down and pull stale air up and out, a silent, ceaseless breath for her underground world. While the town above celebrated the harvest, feasting on fresh bread and roasted meats, Elara was preserving. She foraged relentlessly, gathering bushels of berries, which she dried into sweet, leathery sheets. She dug up cattail roots and ground them into flour. She smoked fish from the creek and salted strips of venison from a deer she had managed to trap.
Her cellar began to fill with the earthy sense of survival. Smoked meat, dried herbs, and earthen jars of pickled roots. The first snows of winter fell. The townspeople huddled by their fires, secure in their wooden houses. Elara's work continued. The snow, for her, was not an obstacle. It was a blanket. It was insulation. It was camouflage. By midwinter, her hillside was covered in a deep drift, and the entrance to her burrow was all but invisible, just another snow-covered mound in a landscape of white. Inside, the temperature remained constant. The massive thermal battery of the surrounding earth kept the cold at bay. A small, efficient stove, built from flat stones and clay, provided enough heat to cook and to keep the chill from the air. She used wood sparingly, her fuel stores carefully calculated to last for months. Spring arrived, and the thaw. While the town contended with mud and meltwater, Elara's carefully designed drainage channels diverted the runoff away from her entrance, keeping her home dry and secure. Another summer passed. She was 14 now. The project was complete. The town had largely forgotten her, their joke grown stale. She was just the mad girl in the hills, a cautionary tale that had lost its novelty. Then the signs returned. It began subtly, a stillness in the forest that was too deep, too absolute. The birds were there, but they were not singing their territorial songs. They were issuing quiet, sharp warnings. She found a traveller's cairn on a high ridge that had been disturbed, the stones rearranged in a pattern her father had described as a scout's signal. Target is ripe. No significant resistance. The final proof came a week later. She was checking her snares near the edge of the woods when she found it. Half buried in the leaf litter was a crossbow bolt.
It was not the crude type used by local hunters.
It was fletched with grey goose feathers, its head a heavy, armor-piercing bodkin. It was military grade. It was the type her father had described being used by the demobilized mercenary companies that roamed the lawless lands after the last war. She held the bolt in her hand, its cold weight a confirmation of everything she had feared. They were no longer scouting. They were preparing.
A wave of cold dread washed over her, followed by a familiar, bitter resignation. She considered for a moment going back. She thought of walking into the town square, holding up the bolt, and trying one last time to make them see. But the memory of their faces stopped her. The mayor's scorn, Croft's smug superiority, the scholar's pitying dismissal, the laughter. They had not just disagreed with her. They had branded her a liar, an outcast. They had punished her for the truth. She opened her father's journal to the last page.
His handwriting was weaker there, written in the final days of his sickness. "When they will not listen," he had written, "save yourself. A living witness is better than a dead prophet." She closed the book. Her duty was not to those who had exiled her. Her duty was to survive, to honor the knowledge her father had given her. She spent the next 2 days in a state of calm, methodical finality. She brought in her last stores of firewood. She topped off every water container. She led Jasper down the sloping tunnel and into the main chamber, settling him in a prepared stall at the far end, filled with dried fodder. He followed her without hesitation, his trust in her absolute. Finally, she stood at the entrance. She looked out at the valley, at the distant plume of smoke from the town's chimneys. The sun was warm, the sky was a placid blue. It was a beautiful, peaceful day. A perfect day for an attack. She pulled the heavy door shut. It was a massive thing, built of thick planks and covered with a layer of sod and living moss. From the inside, she slid 3 heavy wooden bars into iron brackets she had sunk deep into the stone doorframe. The last sliver of daylight vanished. The world outside disappeared. There was only the soft glow of her tallow lamp, the gentle sound of Jasper chewing his fodder, and the deep, profound silence of the earth. The attack began on the 4th day of the harvest moon, just as the first hint of grey light touched the eastern sky. It was not a raid, it was an assault. The bandits, nearly 50 of them, were not a rabble. They were a disciplined company of ex-soldiers, hardened by years of war, led by a captain who understood tactics. They moved with a terrifying silence, emerging from the woods like ghosts. They neutralized the town's 2 night watchmen with silent efficiency, their bodies discovered only when the killing began in earnest. They struck the town from 3 sides at once.
To form a defensive line in the main, to form a defensive line in the main square, but they were cut down in the first volley of crossbow bolts. The ordinary wooden homes of the townsfolk offered no protection. The bandits kicked in doors and slaughtered people in their beds. Fire blossomed, the dry timber of the houses catching with explosive speed. Smoke, thick and black, filled the air, carrying the stench of death and burning pitch. Gideon Croft's proud trading post, the symbol of the town's security, became its most horrific trap. He and his family, along with several others who had sought refuge there, barred the great oak gates. They believed their stone walls were impenetrable. They were wrong. The bandits did not bother with the gates. They used grappling hooks to scale the walls and dropped into the courtyard.
The defenders, caught in the open, were massacred. The bandits then used a battering ram, hastily assembled from a felled tree, to shatter the main doors of the building. What followed was not a fight, but a slaughter. The stone walls that were meant to keep danger out now served only to keep the victims in. The fortress had become a tomb. Deep beneath the earth, a mile away, Elara heard nothing of this. The thick mantle of soil and rock that was her shield muffled the sounds of the dying town into a faint, almost imperceptible vibration. She felt it more than she heard it, a low thrumming in the soles of her feet.
She sat on a low wooden stool, stroking Jasper's neck, her face illuminated by the steady flame of a single lamp. The air in her shelter was cool and clean, drawn in through the hidden vent. The temperature was stable, a comfortable coolness that the violence of the world above could not touch.
Her stores were neatly arranged. Her water was fresh. Her world was ordered and calm. She was the sole occupant of a sanctuary, an island of peace in an ocean of chaos. She burned only a few logs. Her resources were managed with a precision born of foresight. Life for her continued, serene and insulated. The bandits remained for a full day. They pillaged what had not burned, loading carts with grain, tools, and anything of value. By the morning of the second day, they were gone, melting back into the wilderness that had spawned them. They left behind a smouldering, silent ruin. For 2 more days, Elara remained in her shelter. She followed the timeline in her father's journal. "A professional company will not linger," he had written. "They strike, they take, they vanish. But they may leave a rear guard. Wait for the carrion birds to return. They are the true signal that the danger has passed." On the third day, she unbarred the heavy door and pushed it open. The air that greeted her was foul, with the smell of cold smoke and death. The sky was a hazy, bruised color. She saw a column of buzzards circling in the distance, over the place where the town had been. The world had been broken. Late that afternoon, the first survivor arrived. It was Master Valerius. He stumbled through the trees, his fine scholar's robes torn and stained with soot and blood. One arm was bound in a crude sling. His face, once a portrait of intellectual certainty, was a hollow mask of shock and despair. He had seen a thin, almost invisible wisp of smoke rising from what looked like a dead tree trunk, and had staggered toward it, driven by a desperate, irrational hope. He saw her standing at the entrance to the burrow, a silhouette against the dim light within. He stopped, his mouth falling open. He stared at the girl he had dismissed as a fool, the architect of the folly he had so cleverly derided in his public notice. Elara did not speak. There was no triumph in her eyes, no hint of, "I told you so." There was only a quiet, solemn gravity. She stepped aside and gestured for him to enter. He stumbled down the sloping tunnel, his eyes struggling to adjust to the dim light. He saw the vast, ordered space, the neatly stacked supplies, the deep well, the pony standing placidly in its stall. He saw a world built by the foresight he had mocked. He collapsed onto a bench, his body trembling, and finally began to weep. The dry sobs of a man whose entire worldview had been shattered. Elara brought him a cup of clean water and a clean bandage for his arm. She did not say a word. He was the first of many. Over the next day, a procession of the humbled made its way to Elara's folly. A handful of families who had fled into the woods at the first sign of attack. A young couple who had hidden in a grain silo. A blacksmith, his face and arms horribly burned. They were the broken remnants of a proud town. Elara took them all in. Her sanctuary was large, designed for a long siege. The space that had seemed absurdly large for one girl and a pony now became a haven for 30 survivors. She moved among them with a quiet authority that no one questioned. The 13-year-old outcast, now 14, became their leader. She organized sleeping arrangements, rationed the food, and dressed the wounds of the injured with the salves and herbal remedies her father had taught her to prepare. The last to arrive were the most broken. Mayor Theron, his face a grey mask of grief, supported the staggering figure of Gideon Croft.
The wealthy merchant's arm was shattered, and a deep gash ran across his face. His fine clothes were rags, his pride was gone, burned away in the inferno of his stone fortress. He looked at the smooth, earthen walls of Elara's shelter, the simple, effective engineering of it all, and a look of profound, agonizing shame settled over him. His proud walls had failed.
Her humble hole in the ground had saved them all. For a week they lived under the earth. In the quiet solidarity of that shared space, a new community began to form, one forged in catastrophe and humility. Elara was its silent center. She did not command, she simply did what needed to be done, and others followed her example. She was no longer Elara the fool. She was Elara the provider, the savior. When they finally emerged, the full scope of the devastation was laid bare. The town was gone. Only a few stone chimneys and the blackened shell of Croft's trading post remained. It was a graveyard. It was Mayor Theron who called the meeting. He gathered the survivors, the 30 souls who were all that was left, in a clearing that overlooked the ruins of their lives. Elara stood slightly apart from the group, Jasper standing quietly beside her. Theron, Croft, and Valerius walked to the center of the clearing and turned to face her. Their faces were etched with a sorrow that went deeper than their personal losses. It was the sorrow of men who had failed their people through sheer, arrogant pride.
"We have something to say," Mayor Theron began, his voice hoarse. He looked directly at Elara, his gaze unwavering. "A year ago, this child came to us with a warning. She saw a truth we refused to see. She read the world, while we read our ledgers and our maps. We did not listen. We did worse than not listen. We mocked her. We punished her. We called her a liar and a fool." He took a deep breath. "She was right, and we were wrong." Gideon Croft stepped forward, leaning heavily on a crutch. "My wealth, my stone walls, they were nothing. They were a monument to my own vanity. They became a death trap. This girl," he said, his voice cracking, "this girl dug a home out of the earth with her bare hands. She built a fortress of wisdom, not stone. I called her project a folly, but the folly was mine."
We were safe. My knowledge was a prison of its academic certainty. My books and my maps told me we were safe. My knowledge was a prison of ink and paper. I dismissed her wisdom as superstition. But her knowledge was alive. It was written in the soil, in the trees, in the silence of the birds. It was the truest text I have ever encountered. The 3 men, the pillars of the old community, stood before the girl they had exiled. "Elara," Mayor Theron said, his voice thick with emotion, "on behalf of this town, of the living and the dead, we offer our apology. We ask for your forgiveness." A heavy silence fell over the clearing. All eyes were on Elara. She looked at the 3 men, at their humbled faces. She looked at the survivors, their eyes filled with a desperate hope. She felt no anger. She felt no need for revenge. Those emotions were luxuries that had been burned away by labor and loss. Done. Apologies will not rebuild our homes. Done. Apologies will not rebuild our homes or bring back our dead. She paused, letting her words settle. Pride builds walls that fall. Wisdom digs roots that hold. We survived because of my father's knowledge. Now, we will rebuild with that same knowledge. Survival is not about pride. It is about preparation. Her message was clear.
It was not an offer of absolution, but a directive for the future. It was a lesson, delivered by the teacher they had not known they had. And so, they began to rebuild. But they did not rebuild the old town. They built a new one, founded on Elara's principles. The town was moved, relocated to the base of the hills, where the earth offered shelter. Every new home was built with a deep, reinforced cellar, connected by a series of tunnels.
They learned from her how to read the land, how to build with the materials it provided, how to create structures that bent with the world instead of trying to dominate it. Her father's journal became the town's most sacred text, its pages copied and studied by all, and the phrase, "digging an Elara," was reborn. It no longer meant to engage in a foolish task. It came to mean acting with uncommon foresight, preparing with wisdom when others were blind, to see the truth that everyone else denied. Elara never moved into the new town. Her home remained the great burrow in the hillside, the place she had built with her own hands. It became the heart of the community, a library for her father's knowledge, a school, and a council hall. She never married, never had children of her own. The entire town, and the generations that followed, became her family. She was their teacher, their guide, their living conscience. The solitary outcast became the revered matriarch of the people she had saved. She lived for many more decades, her body growing frail, but her eyes remaining as clear and perceptive as they had been when she was a girl. She watched the children of the survivors grow and have children of their own, teaching each generation the lessons of the earth, ensuring they would never forget the price of pride. Elara died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 83. The entire valley mourned her passing. They did not bury her in the town graveyard. They sealed her in a small, final chamber she had prepared within her own earthen home, returning her to the soil she had understood so well. They placed a single, smooth slab of granite over the main entrance to the burrow. There was no grand epitaph, no flowery praise. There were only 3 short lines, carved deep into the stone, a summary of her life and a timeless lesson for all who would come after. It read, "She saw the truth. She dug the earth. She saved the people."